This meeting is being recorded.
Give everybody about another minute to get logged in here.
Oh, am I on?
Tired.
There we go.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our 2022 workshop series.
Good morning.
If you are new to our series, welcome. If you are repeat joiners, welcome back. We're excited to have you and excited to share the content that we have for this series in the works. So just wanted to let you know that the session is recorded, so you're welcome to go back. We'll send out a link after the presentation so that you can share it with your board. You can review it with your staff. So we'll have that at your hands as a tool, but you are being recorded at this time. At the end of this, we'll have a survey sent out to you. Your feedback is really important to us. It's how we design our upcoming workshop. So if you could just take a second to fill that out, we'd greatly appreciate it. And then your attendance today enters you in a raffle to have free attendance for our in-person event that we're planning in September. So that's kind of exciting. I'm gonna be monitoring the chat box, so feel free, as Kent's going through his presentation today, you can do the hand wave, you can type in the chat box. Kent's also welcome to just have this be fluid, and he's welcome to have you interject. So I'm gonna turn it over to him. Welcome, Kent Castleman.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be joining you today. Thank you to the Community Foundation and to DECO for inviting me to be a part of this series. So, and congratulations on all of you for taking time out of your busy day and busy schedules to learn more and maybe feed into each other as well as you work to build a better community in the area. So thank you for all your work. I've been in nonprofit management my entire career. So from that standpoint, it's I know what you're all doing and you're all in. It's great to have the energy and enthusiasm, especially from a programmatic standpoint. I always said we couldn't get anything done if we didn't have great program people. So it's wonderful to have all your energy and enthusiasm for that. So I'll go ahead and get started. Once I properly share everything here, hopefully it works out. Everybody see that okay? Okay, wonderful. And I am keeping the videos up, and so if there's if you can hand raise, and Sarah, I might not see everything, so obviously please interject if there's a hand or something like that and let me know that I need to stop and work on that. So as Sarah said, I'm Kent Castleman. I'm the Chief Philanthropy Officer at the Embassy Theater. I've been in this position for a little over 4 months, so it's pretty new to me, but it's been wonderful to be a part of the historic Embassy Theater and the preservation efforts for the theater, but also our growing programming and educational components as well here at the theater. I won't do too much on that front. It's always good to have a plug, but I encourage all of you to visit the Embassy's website and learn about our programming and educational programming as well. A little bit of background on me. I am, like I said, I had spent my career in nonprofit management from that standpoint, but I was the founder and executive director of the Cornerstone Youth Center in Monroeville, Indiana, and that's just southeast of Fort Wayne, for those who might not know. And I was there for 16 years. And so I spent my first 16 years fully immersed in youth development, working at developing Cornerstone Youth Center for youth in grades 7 through 12. So we focused on middle and high school as a focus for that area, but the youth development component was alive and well. And so I know program development pretty well over the years. I led lots of programs for the first 10 years of the organization. And then the last 6, I was able to step back more into that executive director role and help direct program staff and work through and achieve all the outcomes that we achieved with our programming. So after Cornerstone, I went to Fort Wayne Trails, and I was the executive director there for 3 years. And for those who don't know, Fort Wayne Trails is an advocacy nonprofit. And so Fort Wayne Trails works to build the network of trails here in Allen County, Indiana. They're also a partner of the regional trails effort. And that's where Sarah and I met as well, because as some of you know, Sarah's involved in some of the trails work up there as well. And it's been good to see that. But what was different about Fort Wayne Trails, obviously from an advocacy standpoint, our programming looked a little bit different. So it wasn't about that interaction with clients and things along those lines. It was actually a program built around how do we engage elected officials, how do we engage people in community development and planning, and all sorts of other areas of government and community development to make sure that trails were going to be considered as plans were being put together. After that, at Fort Wayne Trails, that's when I dove headfirst into fundraising and development. Obviously, being an executive director of a small nonprofit, two small nonprofits for smaller nonprofits, I guess, for 19 years, I had also done all of that development work. And so I went through the certificate in fundraising management training that the Community Foundation of Greater Fort Wayne offered. And for the last 4 years now, I've been concentrating on really full-time fund development and philanthropy work as well. In addition to that, I do have some board experience that I've listed here. I'm currently on the Allen County Library Board of Trustees as an appointee of the Allen County Commissioners. And that's given me a whole nother insight into a different type of organization that is funded by taxpayers, but also works to have lots of great, fabulous programming in the community on that end. So obviously I'm not involved at that level to see all of the details of that, but I know that every day we knock it out of the park with that. And then the other things listed are just other boards I've been on, and I've been involved in community and economic development work as well that contributes to rural communities and how do rural communities continue to grow, thrive, and be relevant as we look at a lot of movement towards urbanization. And so how do we make sure that our rural communities aren't forgotten and left in the dark when we're working on community growth and giving people access to programs and resources that they need to live a great life and engage in the community. So let's kind of dive in here then. As I started thinking about, over the years when we start talking about program development and what does it mean to add a new program, I think the first thing that always has to be done is that needs assessment. What is driving the need for this program? What helps you determine when to start or stop a program? And so I think for all of you, it's that one question: is it the right time, and when is the right time to start or stop one? The second question I think you have to ask is your community or your clients or participants in programming asking for it? So that's one thing is, sometimes we can, as an organization, we can look at all the data and we can come up with this great, fabulous program. But if it isn't something our community wants or needs, then we might not have the participants that we're going to have. And so from that perspective, we want to make sure that there's a need in the community for that to be responded to from that. But the best programs are over a period of time. And when I say over a period of time, it might not be a couple months. It might be a couple years that you've been hearing the community say, hey, it would really be nice if we had this after school type of program, or if we had this component for parents of teenagers. And listening to that feedback as you're doing program development helps you figure out what will be successful and what is kind of a shot in the dark. And I don't like shot in the dark programming. I think that if you don't have a survey or something along those lines that indicates that it's needed, or you don't have some anecdotal feedback from your community and or clients and participants, then you really have to ask yourself, is it time to start a program? The other piece, and I kind of just said that if surveys are in this, the surveying is important for your participants, but don't forget about people who aren't participating. So as you're looking at your annual, if you have an annual planning process, if you don't have an annual planning process, I would encourage you to at least add an annual needs survey of your community or your geographical area that you serve, or the wider base of clients. So when I was running Cornerstone Youth Center, we largely focused on Heritage High School. That was just 5 miles down the road from the youth center. Heritage High School is about 800, probably about 900 students at that time, something along those lines. And we would average in a week getting about 75 of those students to come in for programming, unique students that would come in through the door. So there were still 825 kids who we were not reaching. And so we would come up with creative ways to ask opinions of those 825, what do you want to see? And that would help drive, what do we start and what do we stop? And so for you, are you asking your wider community? It's easy to ask the program participants and people who are there, but when you're thinking about your planning, how do you engage those people who aren't connected yet? And especially if you're in youth programming, how are you engaging the parents to see what they would be willing to support and what they would be willing to bring their kids to and work through on that end? And then the last thought I had on this is that sometimes starting and stopping a program is also driven by your strategic plan and your board engagement. So board members, for a lot of us, are an extension of staff from that standpoint, depending on the size of your organization. And we know that board members have great ideas. We also know that board members have lots of ideas. And so not every idea that the board comes up with is a good one. But that's the job of us as program staff and as directors to say, understand why you're thinking we need that, but how do we shape that into something? Or is there just a component that can be added to a current program instead of adding a different program? Or does it require us to think about a whole new planning process for a new program? And I would ask in your strategic plans, sometimes as well, especially if boards are engaged at a very high level, strategic plans sometimes can miss having a detailed programming component. So I'd encourage you to all look at your strategic plan again. And if it doesn't contain at least one goal that's related to your programming, then have a conversation. If you're not in charge, have a conversation with your leadership and things along those lines to make sure that your strategic plan is calling for it. Because I look back at it and go, it's easy for strategic plans to look at, big visionary goals or capital campaign or capital type of needs. And sometimes we have to make it missional. How does it relate back to the mission? How does it get and accomplish our goal every day of making sure that mission is served in the community? So it's good in that sense, but it's also good because then there's a programmatic component that maybe you're regularly talking about or reviewing with your board if it's a part of that strategic planning process. And so I just encourage you to all put that in. So, as I think about that, is there anything else that I didn't talk about that any of you have found as a reason to start or stop a program?
Please feel free to unmute and
Yeah.
ask your questions to Kent directly.
I can say that when I first started at Common Grace Ministries, we had a piece going on, not necessarily a program, but it was sort of a service going on that had just really fallen away in its effectiveness. And then we also had an office where, we weren't seeing very many people. So, the program went away. We stopped putting resources there and put them elsewhere that are very successful. But we also had to look at financial feasibility of having an office open where only 14 people came in that office that year. And then what do you do with your other locations to make sure those people are covered without that office right in their own community? So, we did that by making sure we had an east office and a west office open that were equidistant from the one that closed. So sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's just effectiveness.
Yep. And common sense. It doesn't make sense to keep an office open for 14 people a year. From that standpoint, but it's hard because we want to do everything we can to reach as many people as we can, but we have to look at those precious resources that we have to go into it to make sure we're doing the best we can with those resources. Great, thank you, Angie. Any other thoughts on that? And you guys can chime in anytime, even if you think of something later on, feel free to jump in. All right, I'm going to keep going. And so from a basic standpoint, and I know that the presentation was sent out, I believe, prior to. This is a new slide that I added in, so I'll make sure that Sarah and Margarita get the final copy here after the presentation. But I started thinking last night, I don't have just a bare bones, what makes a great program, from that standpoint, and what are the components of a program when we start thinking about. Now, I think there's a lot of you on the call that probably could, give this slide from that standpoint. But I look at it and I always ask, what is the change that we're wanting to see or make in program participants or in the community? From that perspective, it's always the question to think with the end in mind. What are you wanting to change, and what's that behavior you're either wanting to improve, or as in the case with Fort Wayne Trails, how do we want to make our community better by making sure that there's components of trails in all development that's happening in Allen County from that standpoint. I was involved a lot with the Fullinger Foundation here in Allen County, and for years, the Fullinger Foundation used the logic model as a way to build out a program. And for those of you not familiar with a logic model, it basically has quite a few components, but the three basics are inputs, outputs, and outcomes from that standpoint. And an input is, what inputs are you going to have to put in to make that program successful? What resources of staff, materials, curriculum, if you're going to have speakers. I forgot to put the most important one, swag and incentives for participants. That's always a good, important one to make sure that you're rewarding people for being a part of it. And then the output part of it is the quantifiable numbers. So how many people are you looking to serve in that program? And in order to be effective, are there a certain number of sessions that you need to do? Is this going to be a weekly program? Is this going to run, throughout the school year, or is this going to be a summer program and it's going to be maybe just a week-long summer camp or something along those lines and component? And so the outputs are those quantifiable type of things that you can, really count and put down on paper. The outcome side of it is where we start to see the behavior change. And for outcomes, you want to think about it in kind of three ways. Is it a short-term outcome, an intermediate outcome, or a long-term outcome? And this is where we also have to be realistic. And I'll never forget the first time that I put together one of my logic models, and I was gung-ho, Cornerstone's going to change the world, it's the way it's going to be. And I put down that, we were going to have 100% graduation of all of our students who were members. That's what I put down. And sounds like a great goal, right? I mean, who doesn't want all of our students to graduate and things along those lines? But the question that was asked of me when we had a workshop around the logic model is, are you 100% in charge of that long-term outcome? And the answer was no, we're not in charge. There's many factors. There's family life, there's our parents engaged in the education of that child. There's, the child themselves. Do they have the capacity and the skills to be able to complete, what needs to be done? So they said, while that's a worthy long-term goal, that can lead to it, but you really need to think about it more in how are you doing short-term and intermediate outcomes. And so from a short-term outcome, and I'll add this in afterwards, short-term outcomes largely deal with knowledge gain or skill development. So where are you looking to build that skill in the program participant and or gain that knowledge? And so these, again, are things that are usually quantifiable a little bit, either through a survey or some identifiable way that the participant can tell you, I've gained this skill or this knowledge. The intermediate is more leaning towards, have you seen a behavior change? And then long-term, obviously, is like the example I just gave. But when I was talking, it's okay for that long-term outcome for you to not fully own it, but don't make your program all about that long-term outcome. So how do you build short-term, intermediate, long-term? So an example of that, at Cornerstone, we had we ran every day after school from 3 to 6. and we had an education center where we offered homework help and tutoring every day. And so we looked at that and went, what's the short-term goals that we want to achieve for the participants in there? And the short-term goal, and this is where the output and the short-term goals can sometimes get a little bit crossed, if I want to say it that way. We said we want to have a simple behavior change in the fact that we want students to be coming into the education center. So yes, it's an output to measure how many are coming in, but the behavior change that we would see is that kids would come to the center and they would right away want to go to the rec part of the building. You know, we want to go play pool, we want to get on a computer, we want to go outside and play basketball, you know, that type of thing. So for us, we started saying, how do we get more kids into the education center? And by those students responding that they are coming into the program, that was a short behavior change to say that they are coming and they are attending in that. And then further going down that short term, when we look at knowledge gain, we actually started having, similar to what schools have, but we started doing it in our own way. How do you study? And how do you become a good student? And for those, and we worked with a lot of at-risk youth from that standpoint. And so for some of them, they needed some of that, just the simple basics of, let's help organize your binders. Let's help organize your files. Let's help do some of the structural stuff. Let's help you remember to bring your textbook tomorrow. That would be wonderful if you'd show up with your textbook so we can work on your homework. So those types of things were the short term. And that's the knowledge gain side of that for us from an education center standpoint was the fact that they were learning how to become a better student. The intermediate step then for us was, are we seeing changes in grades? Are we seeing completed assignments? And so we'd have quite a few students that would come in that, you know, might start out with 5 or 6 or 7 missing assignments. And so we actually would keep track for each student when they came in initially, what did that look like? And this part got to be easier when things like a Blackboard and the online grade systems came out that we all have access to these days. Now we, as Cornerstone, we couldn't get access to that without permission, obviously, from parents. And so one of the components of the education center was a form that parents filled out that would give us access to their child's grades and things along those lines, so we could actually monitor where was that missing assignments, where are their grades at when they came in, and then that allowed us to have a measurement to say how many did they have at the end of the semester. Then how many missing assignments did they have? Any? Were they all in? Did they have grade improvement? You know, what did that look like? And so that was really the intermediate, obviously, because that you would see a significant behavior change from a student who might be failing 3 or 4 of his classes to then passing his classes at the end of the semester. There had to be a behavior change in that child. So that's just one example. And of course, we can only assume that by helping that child be a better student in a short-term and intermediate way, that the long-term goal of them graduating is going to be met. But for us to own that long-term goal would not have made sense. And then the measuring success part, and I mentioned a couple things in there that were ways you could measure success, but are you using surveys? Are you using observation as a way to see that behavior change? And the pre and post surveys obviously are very important. And we moved to a lot of pre and post in an end survey of our programming, because it was hard. We know that whenever we're working on programs with youth, that they're not always consistent in coming. You start the program with 10 kids and you could end the program with 10 different kids. So from that standpoint, we started measuring after how many sessions do we feel that those students attend, do we need to give them a survey? So we started doing some surveying intermediately throughout after they attended, say, 5 sessions. And we would simply ask them before joining this program, let's just say it was a financial literacy program. Before joining this program, did you feel comfortable? Did you understand what a checking account was? And they would say yes or no. And then after attending the program, do you know what a checking account is? Yes. So you could see it, and some kids might have known that beforehand, and some kids might have known that might not have known that. So you can see that change on that end of it. And the last piece that I wanted to talk about a little bit was engagement. And so, we're all really good about, this is very technical when we start talking about putting programs together, but we have to be focused on how are we engaging the youth to be a part of it. And oh, great. I was just seeing there were comments, so I was just making sure I was not frozen or something. So that engagement piece is so important because obviously for program participants, whether it be youth or adults, they're choosing to be a part of this. And so we need to make sure that, it is a component of their social life, a component of entertainment, and things along those lines, and that what we're doing has engagement pieces that makes them want to be a part. And through that engagement, we can achieve some of those outcomes on that end of it. So,
Kent, did you want to reference the comments in the box?
yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at that. Logic models help staff and board members understand program workflow as well. Yes, I agree on that. The logic models are that they are logical from that standpoint. And I always get confused. You can see everything on my screen, right? There's nothing being blocked right now, right? Okay, good. The one piece about that, and thank you for saying that, Sean, is on a logic model, when I say think with the end in mind, a lot of times with logic models, we talk about it this way because it's easy to think about inputs, outputs, outcomes in that order. But you really want to start with the outcome. What's the behavior you're wanting to change? What is that, what is that skill you're wanting to build or that knowledge that you're wanting to increase? And then you work backwards to say, okay, it's not going to happen in somebody attending a session twice. So how many sessions? So that kind of leads to your outputs. What's your goal and outputs for that? Attendance wise, number of sessions, things along those lines. And then ultimately, what do you need then to make that program happen? So thinking through it that way, it is a good workflow from that. And if you go a step further on your outcome side of it and you start to build out more of a timeline that mirrors with your sessions, then you can start to insert when certain surveys can happen and things along those lines for workflow as well. Sean, did you have anything else you wanted to say to that?
No, I don't. I was just gonna say, for those of you that are not familiar with logic models, I have a love-hate relationship with them.
You're not alone.
Oh my gosh, yeah, they either are fantastic and they work for you really, really well, or they just suck the life out of you and you just want to throw your computer across the room. But I will tell you, if you don't know how to create one, you use the Lucid chart. That is a fantastic tool. And there's all kinds of really cool logic models out there that you can just plug and play, and it'll actually make it more enjoyable for you, and you'll just have a lot more fun with it. And it's just that would be my helpful tip for you.
That's great. Yes. Love-hate relationship, and it's stressful too and close your ears, Margarita and Sarah, when funders are requiring them, and you especially have newer staff that are just, they get overwhelmed by the big picture. And so I found even logic models at the beginning just stressed them out until you had somebody who could take them through it and say, but let's think about it. It's all the components it's a way of putting it in a flow that you could understand and that funders can understand too. So
the other challenge with it is when you have funders who give you different logic models to fill out. So there's no universal logic model, just like no universal budget, no universal forms. So they're all look different. They're all asking for different things. So I think if you can create one for your own organization that makes sense to you, then when you receive one from a funder, you can just end up plugging your stuff in. It's a lot easier.
Yeah. And Angie, I do like your comment as well about making sure that's on hand and in front of people. And as you're having staff meetings and even board meetings, those logic models become a really quick dashboard to share. Every time that I submitted it to the Fullinger Foundation, that was always something that I gave to my board to say, here's our logic model to say what we did this year. And it's a really good snapshot for those analytical people on the board to see that there was quantifiable change, because we know that we have those board members that want to see that. So, great. Great. Okay, I think those are the main questions. We'll keep moving. Is there anything else I missed as we're thinking about components of a program and when you're working on it? Did anybody have any other thoughts related to that? Again, keep offering them up or put it in the chat, because we can all gain knowledge from this as well. So, mission or program creep. So I felt like this is a good topic. As an executive director over the years, I had to say no more than I got to say yes, right? From that standpoint, because everybody has these creative ideas and they want to come up with, the best fix for the community or the next best thing to get people in the door. And while it's wonderful, we don't always have the luxury or capacity to have another program from that standpoint. So, and I also think that, oftentimes you hear mission creep. Mission creep, for those, who don't know, I kind of put a second bullet in here. It's where you're stretching your program goals to fit your mission from that standpoint. And, what does that look like? And I say it causes mission creep because I think it can happen over time, a little bit at a time. And I think that's where, if you aren't careful with your programs, if your focus is youth and you want to focus on those youth, and all of a sudden you add a parent program because you want to have a parent program and it makes sense to have a parent program, but then you're putting, your effort into that parent program instead of the core focus, which is the youth that you should be serving. And yes, at times it makes sense to have that component, but is it a stretch? Now that one's maybe not a stretch because there's a component there. One example that I wanted to share from Fort Wayne Trails, we partnered with an organization here in Fort Wayne called Bicycle Friendly Fort Wayne. And it's a wonderful group of people, all meaning well and all wanting to make Fort Wayne a more friendly community for bicycles. And so they were an all volunteer group. No one was paid at all in that group at all. And they had their focus of, we want to get more people on their bicycles out in the streets. In Fort Wayne, the bike lanes and on the trails and things along those lines. But they specifically were really focusing on, how do we make the streets in Fort Wayne more bicycle friendly? And Fort Wayne Trails, while that was a component of what we looked at, we weren't really focused on bike lanes and bicycles and streets. We were focused more on standalone trails that were connecting neighborhoods, connecting communities, and were a lot of times when we think about a trail, that's what it would be. And so, but they were a good partner, from that standpoint, and we need to work with them. But we got into a situation with them where there was an opportunity through General Motors to apply for a grant. And one of their people in Bicycle Friendly Fort Wayne had talked to somebody, and they had an in to be able to get this money from GM, that they could offer these bicycle training classes to transportation people, because one of the things that they had seen is people driving semis and box trucks and things along those lines, delivery vehicles especially, were not paying attention to bike lanes, and they were cutting bikers off and things along those lines. So we, as Fort Wayne Trails, being the wonderful people that we are, agreed that we could go forward and do this program. And it ultimately was a big stretch for us. And because we had paid staff then, it started to tax us, because then we were the ones all of a sudden setting up these classes. We were the ones taking the registration. We were the ones, doing all of these things. And it really wasn't a focus of who we were. And so that program creep can lead to mission creep at times. Now, it didn't lead to mission creep for us at Fort Wayne Trails, but it led to, staff creep and, focusing on that side of it. But focus on what you're good at doing. What is your main focus, and how do you keep your main focus? How do you keep your main thing the main thing? To look at that and go back to Stephen Covey, keep your focus on that piece of it. The other piece of mission creep that can kind of come in is when you're chasing the funding or you're chasing what your board or volunteers want you to do. And it's, it's very easy. It's very easy on the funding side. We know that piece of it. And I'm sure that Margarita and Sarah probably have all kinds of stories about how that can happen. But we see this grant opportunity come up and we think, how can we fit this into the organization? But if it does not align with any of your programs, you really should just say, that's a great opportunity for somebody else in the community to have. How do I move on? And if volunteers bring it up, that's where you can go back to your strategic plan or back to your logic models and things along those lines and say, it's a great grant, but I can't find how it fits into anything we've already agreed upon to be our program structure. And so, use those tools that we just talked about creating to state your case, then to politely push back on a board member or volunteer that might be interested in seeing that part of it. And then the last piece, I'd say, use your gut. If it feels like a stretch, it's probably a stretch, from that standpoint. And we've all been in the room where nobody wants to say it because somebody had a good idea, but it's a stretch sometimes. So, use your gut to kind of check that piece of it. So
Kent, we had a couple comments on this
Yep.
one in agreement with what you were saying. If you want to refer to the chat.
good, I'll have to pay you guys afterwards. No. Mission creep tends to happen when organizations are chasing grant dollars or funding. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's the number one reason, and a lot of times too, it's like a $500 or $1,000 grant or something, and that's what I look at and go, it's amazing how a little pot of money can all of a sudden steer us like in this direction that's just crazy. And we need to keep thinking about that piece of it. But I just found over the years that there were so many board members that would just be like, hey, here's this grant, here's this, I think you guys need to be going for it. But we don't think about, when we're going for grants, how much time and resources are you taking to put a grant proposal together? And is it going to be worth more than what you ultimately, are going to be getting from that grant? And that's a question you have to ask. Now, sometimes bottom line is bottom line, so that extra $1,000 helps. But you do have to ask yourself, are there better ways for that staff person to be using their time, other than that? Sometimes it's about keeping the staff person busy, and it shouldn't be about that. It's about how are they effective, and maybe there's another way they can be helping bring in $1,000 instead of writing that grant. And then Angie, it's easy to get sucked into creep when things in front of you is very close to, but not quite what your mission really is. Those are the hardest ones, when it's right on the line. Yeah, it's right on the line of what you do, and or you might have people that you're already serving who you see can benefit, but there just might not be enough of them to justify doing it. So yeah, very good comment on that one. Okay. Does anybody have an example of or an experience where you've seen program or mission creep?
We have one that's threatening right now. We work with people who are homeless sometimes. And Felicia and I are working together on a case. Felicia, I'm just going to drag you right into this. I'm not going to give any details, of course, but they had a person that needed to be placed, and we will help pay for a hotel night occasionally. That turned into other entities being involved, and now we're looking for a shelter for them and arranging transportation for them. We don't do housing and we don't do transportation, but we've got this person, and the next best thing for them is, they got to be in shelter. And we had storms coming. Let's put that on top of all of it. So in a week's time, I made a total of 90 phone calls that totaled 8 hours and 1 minute of my time alone, not counting staff or anyone else involved. And it was really transportation and finding shelter. And we provide resources for those things, but we are not the ones that normally make those calls. So it was a really big, how do you do on, we got to do something about this. So our response to that is, we're getting those people together and we're going to make a better plan so that everybody understands what each person does, because I can't afford, I had a grant pushed back to almost deadline because of all of that. So it's real easy. I mean, that was a progression that just sort of slippery slope slid right in there.
Well, thank you for working 68 hours last week instead of 60. Because that's what we do, right? Because you make it happen. So that's good. That's a great example. And it's going to lead into where I'm going as well next. It's perfect. Any other examples? I know it's always hard to be a little vulnerable in front of funders, but any other examples of anything people have been involved in that involved creep?
It's Angie, I appreciate that input, because I was, as you were talking, Kent, I was thinking the programs themselves. But Angie, when you were actually referring to the situation, it's actually the individuals that are involved in the programs that are being stretched out of where they belong. And that's a eye opener.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, Lori Wilson with Learn to Read Council in Athens and Limestone County, Alabama.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. And as you were saying that, I also thought about program participants themselves can cause us to have time creep, from that standpoint. I always prided myself on being accessible to program participants. And when we worked with parents as well at the youth center, I had this one gentleman who every week, if he walked in, I knew I was going to be spending the next hour working with him. And I was happy to do it because of the situation and things along those lines, but we all play a big support role.
Kent, I think you might be frozen. Hang tight for just a minute, guys. We'll see if we can get him reconnected here.
While we're waiting, I just checked your Lucid chart, and there's a free option to give it a try. I'm going to give it a try. Thank you for that, Sean.
Yeah, I think I pay like $140 a year. It is totally worth it.
Yeah, there's a $7.95 a month option, and I just lost it. Where did it go? But I'm going to give it a try for free to start with, see what it's like, and see. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's a little intimidating when you first start, but once you get in there, like, oh, this is actually kind of fun. I think I have more issues with trying to get my arrows to line up, but once you get there, you're fine.
Oh, brother, I better do this when I have more time and I'm caught back up from my 8 hours I just spent doing other stuff.
Right, exactly.
Kent, are you back with us?
I am. I apologize.
Okay. It's okay. We froze you for a second.
I had some really good things I was saying too. So yeah, I'm not sure where I lost you, but it's, the individual program people sometimes can also be that creep that enters into our time. So that's kind of where my thought was landing. And so in that, Lorraine, what you were kind of talking about feeds right into this. When is it time to have program partners, and who are those partners to, how you identify them? So we don't have to do everything for our communities. I want to say that again. We do not have to do everything for our communities. You can be really good at doing a few things. And if you focus on those few things, it's really good. So sometimes you need to bring in a program partner, bring in people to work on that. But not all partnerships are what you think they're going to be from that standpoint. So when is the right time to have a program partner? When there's topics or program goals that that cannot be accomplished by your own staff knowledge. So Lorraine, or not Lorraine, I can't remember who was saying it, about the you're not in transportation. So who is that transportation partner that you need to bring in? And I know that for people who maybe are more in a frontline social service role from a continuum of care, you've thought through some of these things, and a lot of you in that more casework kind of realm are used to this kind of thing. But if we're more of a programmatic kind of organization and we only have a few programs, sometimes we think we have to offer everything, but we don't. Who is the program partner? How can you offer those referrals? How can you make sure that, you know, it's not taxing your organization to add another component? And then mission alignment for collaboration. And so sometimes you have missions that are completely different from yours that you need to bring in as a program partner, and they're going to just maybe operate in your facility. So maybe what you're offering is, hey, we have the space, you know, we have this type of thing. We're not going to put any staff time into it. We'll help maybe market it or share the word and things along those lines, but you're in charge of it. It's your program. Come in and use our space. Then there's other missions where they might align more closely with you. And so from that standpoint, that you can partner. So an example of this is when we used to do our youth summer camps, we would partner with a couple other youth centers in the East Allen County area here in Allen County. And we would have all of our program staff together work. We had a leadership week, and we would have those 3 youth center staff come together, develop the curriculum for the week together. And then we were all in charge of recruiting our own kids from our centers, but then we all worked together to complete the program. And so it worked very well because there was mission alignment. We were all very similar in who we reached and what we did in our programming. So there was a common language, but that alignment worked really well on that end. And then the last piece is warning signs of bad partnerships. So I could probably have you all raise your hands who's been in a bad partnership. I have. And once you've been in one, you get burnt and you learn, but yet we go back to the snake and it bites us again sometimes. But it's because we love our community and we love the people that we serve. So, you know, we have to keep trying things, but if a partnership seems one-sided, then it's probably not a good partnership. If you're doing all the work as the agency and you said it's a partnership, then that doesn't come across well, obviously. And there are times too where I found that, and we had another entity when I was at Fort Wayne Trails, that they were another advocacy group, but they were an advocacy group that was aimed at getting other advocacy groups to do more. And so their whole goal was to get us to do more, but they didn't have to do anything. And it was one of those things that I'll never forget when they came to us and they were like, well, our goal this year, our goal is to get 35 new benches along the trails. So how are you guys doing that? and I sat there going, huh? Like, let's partner together. Well, what resources do you have for us, or what grants or things have you identified that we can go for? And they were like, oh, well, we haven't done any of that, but just let us know when you come up with a plan as to how you can accomplish that. And it's like, that's not our mission. No, our mission isn't to have that. And so, you know, if it feels wrong, then it probably is wrong. And the other piece of this is if directors or staff are not responsive to needs and timelines during prep. So if you are working through the planning phase with a partner and the partner's staff or directors are not being responsive to the needs of what needs to happen in order for this program to get off the ground, they're not, you know, if they're in charge of finding a curriculum, say for an alcohol, tobacco, and other drug prevention program, and you've sent 3 emails and you still don't have the curriculum identified because they've not done anything, those start to become warning signs. You know, again, it's common sense, but sometimes I feel like we just need to say this, you know, we say it out loud, that if in the planning process, it's not going well, then assume the program probably isn't going to go well, and it's going to be all on you as the program partner who's doing a lot of the work. And so sometimes in the planning process, it's just time to cut and run. And don't feel bad about cutting and running if it's not going to be there. Now, if you've already advertised the program, you might have to, you know, I guess, eat a little crow a little bit to say we're not doing it anymore, and the partnership could go away, but it's still better than taxing the entire organization around something that might just be a floundering program the entire time you're trying to do it. So I love talking about positive things too, but I would love to hear positive and negative examples if anybody has one, and I'll go ahead and read the comments here as if there's anybody else who has something to offer. Anybody have examples?
Amanda had something in the chat you want to refer to.
program is currently in a situation in which our main partner funder is trying to help us with funding. As a result of them chasing the funding, they are pushing us to add more to our program, and we are struggling to find the benefit in it. Yeah, yep.
Yeah, I feel
Yeah,
like
and
that kind of
so-
ties to what you're saying now and the mission creep. Like they provide our match dollars for us, and they're trying so hard to help us find more funding that they're almost like pushing us to expand our program outside of our focus and taking our focus away from it. And it's causing some issues. So it's a very interesting partnership in that they're our main funder and they're our match funder. So we rely on them really heavily.
Sure.
But so we're finding that balance of like how to say no politely, or how to balance and manage that relationship right now.
Yeah. Yep. Sarah and Margarita, I'll put you on the spot a little bit there, since she kind of talked about it being a funding partner. You know, I have found that over the years too. I mean, you all have outcomes you're trying to achieve as well. So I mean, as you're working on outcomes and community change, you know, how do you guys keep in check from that standpoint to not, you know, talk about what Amanda just offered?
I think you're right, Kent. We keep our priorities at the front of all that we do. We talk a lot about when we don't have the opportunity to actually give funding, we like to provide resources. So we want to be a convener of resources. If it's not a right project for us, we like to connect people with maybe who are doing the same thing, or maybe a resource to help an organization. So it's not just a no, thank you, but it's this isn't right for us, but we've seen this before and we think this might help.
Yep.
I agree with Sarah. That's pretty much what we like to do as a foundation, is we're trying to help our nonprofits. And so if we can't fund them, we try to give them resources to go and seek other funding, you know, or other places, other things they can do to improve either whatever project they're working on. It's just, yeah, we're trying to be helpful as much as we can. We don't want them to be formatting their application to what we want to see in the application. We want them to be able to tell us exactly what they're doing, what their program's all about, and how can we help them. So we don't want them chasing the money.
Yeah. And I would say that you all as trained professionals in this, you probably can see applications. It probably comes through if you feel like they're stretching, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I bet so. Because I mean,
Yeah. Kent, we try to encourage people as they're working on their application to call us even beforehand as they're working through questions. If they're struggling on that front end, we want to help, you know, either re-steer that this isn't the right opportunity at the right time, or just help them through the application process. So we don't want that application to be cumbersome in any way, shape, or form.
right.
Absolutely.
Yep. And you're exactly right. And I didn't talk about the intermediate process of have a conversation with your partner, you know, have a meeting, have something along those lines. If something's not going right, come to agreement. And I can't say it enough, write it down. If you are in partnership with somebody, write the expectations from each partner down, what you're each bringing to the table. You can formalize that in a memorandum of understanding. If you're not familiar with that, go ahead and just Google that. There's tons of examples of memorandums of understanding. I know that when we were a 21st Century Learning Center site for the Indiana Department of Education at Cornerstone. And as a part of that application process, we had to have MOUs, or memorandums of understanding, from all of our partners stating Cornerstone will offer this, our partner is going to offer this, and here's the fee that they're going to charge. That all had to be in a memorandum of understanding. So we are all wonderful people and we trust people. And so a lot of times we don't think that's necessary. If you don't want to go that far, then follow up the meeting with just a simple, you know, recap of like a minutes, or some kind of a recap of what you agreed upon, or just send an email with a few bullet points to say, thanks for meeting today. As I understand it, this is what we're going to be doing. This is what you're going to be doing. If you can just, you know, let me know that that's, you know, we're all in agreement, that would be great. That would be That's just one way to do it. And then Angie's got more going too. It's not always about trust. When things happen fast, it's nice to have that on hand as well to remind who does what. That's exactly right. Because sometimes when you're in that program, it just, things are flying and it's like, nope, 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 you guys agreed to do that, not us. So reminding on that end of it, that's right. All right, and then Sean, funders don't want to see us fail. You're exactly right, because honestly, if we fail as program people, their outcomes fail too. So foundations do not want to see us fail. So we do need to communicate that side of it, and it is our responsibility to communicate to the organization's capacity. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. If you don't stay in your comfort box, there's an opportunity to grow and strengthen your organization without mission creep, then be open to new ideas. Yeah. I don't want to sound too scary about partnerships and all that. No, explore on that end of it. Just go into it smart. And that's what I'm trying to say from that standpoint, is make sure we're smart with what we do. So on that standpoint, this is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me, and I take text messages, cell phone calls, whatever on that end of it. But if anybody's working through a situation, you just kind of want to talk through a little bit or anything, I'm open to that. I love helping nonprofits. I do some consultation on the side in strategic planning and program development, things along those lines, and of course fundraising from that standpoint. But I just like to help. So don't be shy about reaching out on that end of it. Are there other comments? I know, Sarah, you got some, I think, closing comments or things along those lines, but are there any other questions or comments right now that anybody wants to ask? All right. Well, it was a pleasure to join you all today.
Kent, thank you so much. Such a wealth of knowledge, and thank you for all of you who participated in either the chat box or just verbally and following along with us today. It's been so nice to see new faces on this platform. I like that we're expanding the reach on this. If you guys in the future want to go into your picture box and the 3 little dots on the side, there's that rename feature. If you want to add your organization onto there as well, I think it can help with the collaboration for individuals while they're on these Zooms. Margarita and I really like to just see people talking together and having those outside connections too. I think that's the power of these workshops as well. So just keep that in mind. Our next session will be in a month, and it's going to be presented by Kelly Trusty from Trine University. She's going to be focusing on evaluation for your organization and for programs. So we have that exciting one coming up. Just a reminder that we're going to send you some updated slides from this presentation. You'll be receiving an email for the survey. And then again, you have emails for Kent, myself, and Margarita, should you have any questions or anything about today's content or anything coming up in the future. Thank you guys so much for joining us.